Yeah. Okay, so thank you both for the introduction and for giving me the chance to come and speak to you tonight about AmiBroker. We're going to go through a pretty high-level overview of the platform and then take a little bit of a peek at a short backtest that Dave wrote in AmiBroker's programming language, which is called AFL. So let's go ahead and get started on that. First, a quick disclaimer. You should assume that everything we're doing tonight is an example and not any advice to buy or sell any particular security. You can lose money trading. If all of you have not already discovered that, congratulations to you. So our agenda for tonight, we're going to take a quick look at AmiBroker from a very high level. That's my 10,000-foot view. We're going to talk about AmiBroker data sources, and then we're going to jump into the different kinds of analysis that you can do with AmiBroker, and those are referred to as scan, explore, backtest, and optimize. We're going to talk a little bit about watch lists because that's an important consideration when you're doing backtesting, and then we're going to look at some sample AFL. So AmiBroker from 10,000 feet, or 3,048 meters for those of you that use sensible 21st century measurement systems, unlike the United States. So as Dave mentioned, AmiBroker is a comprehensive technical analysis program that allows you to quickly get started with very basic backtests or explorations, while also giving you a ton of power and flexibility to implement complex trading algorithms and other solutions. So we're going to quickly go through right now how AmiBroker does charting. I will talk very briefly about analysis, and we'll go into that a little bit more later. And I do want to introduce you to the help system because it's very good in AmiBroker, and you will come to rely on it a lot. So in just a second, we're going to do a quick charting demo. We're going to create a new chart. We're going to change the chart style. We're going to see how we can change the time period for the chart. So in other words, how long each of the bars are, and look at how we add some indicators. So I'm going to flip over to my AmiBroker window, which hopefully everybody is seeing now. And if we go to a new blank chart, AmiBroker in this upper left-hand pane that we see here has 3 tabs. It has charts, symbols, and layouts. At the moment, we're on the charts tab. And the charts tab has all of these yellow folders. So it has a yellow folder for averages, one for bands, basic charts, custom, et cetera, et cetera. So if we look in the basic charts folder, we find something called price. And if we double click on that, AmiBroker will give us a price window. So now I have prices for SPY because SPY is my currently selected symbol. If I wanted to pick something else like Apple, I can just type in that symbol name, and I'll see an Apple chart. And I see in a little drop-down list here a D, which means that I'm looking at a daily chart. And if we tab through different prices, we can see up here at the top, you'll see the date change from September 7th, 10th, 11th, etc. If we wanted to see weekly bars instead of daily bars, we can go to our little drop-down list here, and it shows smaller time increments, but since I'm working on a daily database, I can't really choose something like 15 minutes, or I can choose it, but AmiBroker says, well, dude, you really only have daily data, so I'm still going to have to show you daily data. But I could choose something like weekly, or I could even choose something like annually, yearly. So if I just wanted to see yearly prices for Apple, that's the kind of price chart that we all wish we had invested in the year 2000, right? Going from something so close to 0 that it doesn't even register on a chart to up over 220. If I don't like candles, if I don't like candlesticks, I prefer bars, I can go to View Price Chart Style and choose bars instead of candlesticks. And now I have bars. Maybe I want to look at monthly bars, for example. Right, so there's my monthly bar chart. Now, usually we're not too interested in just plotting prices. We want to do things like maybe we want to look at a moving average. So let's go back to a daily chart. And maybe I want my 200-day moving average on there because a lot of people use that as a baseline for trading. So over here in my averages folder, I see MA. and I can drag that over and drop it onto my chart. I can change the color to something that'll show up nicely, bright pink, and I want it to be 200 bars, so I can tell AmiBroker 200 periods. Whoops, there we go. So now I have my 200 bar, 200 day moving average on my chart. And then I'm going to add a CCI indicator because that's going to come in later when we look at Dave's code. So I can go down to my indicator folder, I can open that up, find CCI in my list. And in this case, I'm just going to double click on it, which tells AmiBroker, hey, go ahead and open this indicator in a new chart pane for me. And again, I'll change the number of periods and the color. And I've got a new pane down here at the bottom that shows my CCI 10. And it shows the value for whatever the currently selected bar is. And it shows the value of the last bar on the chart over here in the little blue tag next to the legend. So as you can see in this indicators folder, there are a ton of AmiBroker indicators that are pre-built that you can use. There's the things that AmiBroker identifies as indicators, and then there's things that I would call indicators that are in other places. So there's a special group just for averages, a special group just for Bollinger Bands and Keltner Bands and things like that. And then finally, we have a list of custom things, which are all things that I have programmed over time that I can also drag and drop onto a chart. And we'll talk a little bit more about those later. So that is charting. All right, and there's just a little picture to remind me that yes, we were supposed to do a demo there, which we just did. All right, so the other primary thing that you can do with AmiBroker is a group of functions that AmiBroker refers to as analysis. And there are 4 types of analysis. The first type of analysis is called scan. All a scan does is it goes out and finds all of the entry and exit signals, so buy, sell, short, and cover, that your AFL has generated. It does nothing else, but that can be very useful sometimes. Number 2 is an exploration. An exploration is kind of a power version of the scan, because with an exploration, I can define what columns of data I want, and I can define when the rows appear for a certain symbol. So I can spit out any sort of indicator I want, or any kind of intermediate value that I might be using in my code. So exploration really serves 2 primary functions. One is as a debugging tool, just for me to figure out what's going on. And the second is when I want to maybe go out and scan for certain conditions in my database and see how often something has occurred, things like that. Maybe I want to find all my trading setups for tomorrow, and in addition, I need to know what my limit price is. So I could use an exploration to tell me these are the 10 symbols that have a setup today, and by the way, you should enter if the price falls below X tomorrow. The third kind of analysis is the one that everybody is probably the most familiar with, and that's a backtest. So in a backtest, we define a set of entry and exit rules, and we ask AmiBroker to go out and use that set of rules as if we had actually been trading those rules on some universe of stocks or any tradable symbols in the past. So backtest basically gives us historical trading results. And then finally, we have an optimization. And all an optimization is it's a series of backtests wherein we substitute different values for each of our parameters based on an optimize command within the AFL. And AmiBroker has 2 types of optimization. One is an exhaustive optimization. So if I have 2 parameters that I've chosen to optimize on, let's say it's the length of a moving average and the number of periods in an RSI, for example. If I test 2 different moving average lengths and 5 different values for my RSI threshold, then I would have a total of 10 optimization runs, because it's every unique combination of parameters within my backtest. So 10 sounds pretty reasonable, and 10 is quite reasonable. 100 is reasonable. 1,000 is reasonable. But if you have a lot of parameters in your backtest, and each of those parameters has many values that you want to test, whether it's the actual number of periods in the indicator or whether it's the threshold that you're testing against, it's very easy to come up with hundreds of thousands and perhaps even millions of different combinations of parameters. And in that case, when you go to run your optimization, AmiBroker will tell you there are 1 million variations of this strategy, and it's going to take you 38 hours to run the whole thing. If you don't want to wait 38 hours, AmiBroker has something called a smart optimization, and it has at least 3 different algorithms that I know of for going out and trying to find the best combination of parameters based on some utility function that you've supplied to AmiBroker. So you tell AmiBroker, well, what I want is the best car over MDD value, and AmiBroker starts running different combinations of parameters until it starts to see the ones that are creating the best car over MDD, and it will continue to try to refine that rather than running all 1 million combinations. So that's an optimization. The final thing that I want to talk about in our very high-level overview here is the AmiBroker help. The AmiBroker help files are truly a fantastic resource. It's absolutely the best place to go when you are first learning AmiBroker, as well as if you get stuck on something. It's split up as many help files are into a contents section, a search section. There are some nice tutorials that you can go through. When you can't find what you're looking for in the help files, you can certainly go to the support forum, which is at forum.amibroker.com. Just be sure that on your first trip to the forum, you take a look at all the forum rules and, not only follow the rules in terms of etiquette and things like that, but also conduct yourself in an admirable manner. You will find that some of the people that are on the forum are very knowledgeable, but not necessarily very polite. And if you go in saying, hey, can somebody just write free code for me? Or you throw a question out there and don't define really very well what you're looking for, or you don't show any proof that you've been trying to solve the problem yourself, it's very likely you will find somebody jumping down your throat telling you what an awful person you are because you're not following the rules of the forum. So just be aware of that. When you do play by the rules, people there can be incredibly helpful. So I just wanted to jump out for 1 second and take a quick look at the AmiBroker help, which we get to from the help menu. So here's my AmiBroker help. And as I mentioned, there's a nice tutorial there with all sorts of information that's very helpful when you're first learning AFL. There's also over here on the left, you'll see a tab that says favorites. So when you find yourself going back to the same page over and over, you can mark it as a favorite, so it's very easy to get back to. For example, the CBT reference is one of the things that I have tagged in my favorites list. Another thing that's very useful in the contents section, when you do get around to AFL, under AmiBroker formula language, there's a categorized list of AFL functions. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, I need to do something with time frames, but I don't really know how to do it. Well, there's a whole section here on date and time functions. And further down, I'm not seeing them at the moment. Further down, there's a section, oh, here we go, at the very bottom, time frame functions. So being able to set different time frames. For example, if you're running against daily bars and you want to do some calculation against weekly bars, you can manipulate the time frame. But as you scroll through this categorized list, it makes it much easier to find things where you may not know the name of the function, but you kind of know what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So that's the AmiBroker help. Great place to go. And again, if you go to the AmiBroker forum and you haven't tried to find something in the help first, you're likely to have somebody tell you, oh, just go and read this, and they're going to point you right back to that help file. All right, so back to our slides. There's my reminder that we were going to go out and do a little demo. So let's talk about data sources. AmiBroker is a testing platform, so it does not include any useful price data of its own. It comes with a tiny little mini database that has old data in it that you won't be able to use for anything. But whereas some other testing platforms like TradeStation and Metastock and NinjaTrader have their own data set, and they pretty much only work with their own data set, AmiBroker takes a more open approach and allows you to use data from any number of providers. So some providers like Norgate have very tight integrations with AmiBroker, and that allows them to provide some additional functionality. And then there's other providers like Tingo and free data from Yahoo and Google and CSI and places like that, where you can import the data into AmiBroker either as a CSV file or perhaps there's some other tool for allowing you to do that. But there's not a lot of additional functionality. But basically anything that's in CSV format, any price data that's in CSV format can be imported into an AmiBroker database. If you are doing testing against end-of-day futures, Forex, or US and Australian stock market data, I can't emphasize enough how good Norgate data is. They are just they are a small company based in Australia, very responsive to their clients, very high quality data, and they have some really nice features that we'll touch on a little bit later. But if you are considering going down this path and using Norgate as your data provider, let me know and we can arrange a discount. So you've got this nice testing platform in AmiBroker. You're trying to figure out who you should use for your data. You know, should you just go out and get free data from Yahoo, or should you purchase data from somebody else? There's a number of things that you will want to consider. So one thing is obviously frequency of updates. I just mentioned Norgate. Norgate only provides end-of-day data, and they don't provide it until about roughly 6 hours, 5 to 6 hours after the market closes. So if you're trying to test a day trading system, or you need your data, you know, like on a 20-minute delay so that you can check it before the market closes for the day, Norgate is not for you. You might want to be looking at something like eSignal or some other real-time data provider, for which you will obviously pay more money. Something else to consider is whether the data has been historically adjusted or not, and this is primarily an issue for stocks. So most every data provider will adjust stock prices for splits, because obviously if the stock splits and there's half as much volume and the price is doubled, you don't want to see that in the middle of your price chart, because your value in that stock didn't change if you were holding shares. What everybody does not necessarily do the same is adjust for dividends or other capital events. Norgate, again, gives you a lot of flexibility with that. Other data providers may or may not. Delisted securities is a really big deal. If you want to test on a long history of, say, the S&P 500, you have two challenges. One is, in order for your backtest to be accurate, you need to know which stocks were members of the S&P 500, say back in the year 2000, 2001, 2002. And also, obviously, you need to at least have all of those stocks in your database. So Enron, you can't trade Enron anymore, but Enron should be in your database. So if your trading system unfortunately got you into Enron just before it crashed, then you should have that as part of your backtesting results. And there's lots of information out there on survivorship bias, including actually Morley, one on Cesar's site. Another thing to consider is database speed. So you will find that anything that's in a local AmiBroker database, meaning it's in files sitting on your hard drive controlled by AmiBroker, is very fast. Data from some other providers, for example, you can use Metastock data within AmiBroker, but something that's in a Metastock database can't be accessed quite as fast as a native AmiBroker database. Again, if you're only testing against a few dozen or even a few hundred symbols, database speed may not be a big deal. If you're testing against thousands or tens of thousands of symbols, you might become much more sensitive to how fast the database is. And that can be linked to the database provider and the data provider. Index constituents, that's something I just mentioned a minute ago in conjunction with delisted securities. The only data provider I know that provides historical index constituency data at a reasonable price is Norgate. So that's important. If your trading system says, I'm only going to trade S&P 100 stocks, or I'm only going to trade stocks that are part of the Russell 3000 or anything like that, you'll want to know on a historical basis when certain symbols were members of the index. Watch lists and groups. So some data providers give you nothing except a bunch of symbols and price data. Other data providers will actually give you some watch lists, whether they correspond to indices or industry groups or something else, so that you already have some groupings of symbols that you can test against without necessarily creating all those groupings yourself. And then finally, obviously, the price. So price for data can go anywhere from free at the Google Finance and Yahoo Finance end of the spectrum, up to say $700 or $800 a year for Norgate end of day data for the U.S. stock market, up to as much as you're willing to pay if you're getting data from someplace like Bloomberg, or you're getting lots and lots of real-time data from a company like eSignal, which will be, your price will be based on how many symbols you're accessing, things like that. So definitely give some thought ahead of time to what you actually need for your testing, and then go out and find a data provider that gives you that data at the best price, as well as all these other features that you need to consider. All right, so now let's talk a little bit more in depth about analysis. I mentioned briefly scan, explore, backtest, and optimize, and what each of those do. But let's talk a little bit about how we go about doing that in AmiBroker. So before you perform any type of analysis, we need to do some setup and select some things. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to select our formula. And the formula is an AFL file, and we'll talk a little bit more about AFL in a couple minutes. But we need to say, this is Dave's backtesting.afl file. This is the thing I want to run. AmiBroker has a window called Apply To, and that lets me tell AmiBroker, do I want to run this backtesting code, this analysis code against a single symbol? Do I want to run it against every symbol in my database? Or do I want to run it against some filtered list, which could be a watch list, it could be a group. AmiBroker has lots of different ways of identifying sets of symbols. I need to tell AmiBroker a date range, which can be something as simple as one previous day if I am just looking for my trading signals for tomorrow, or it might be a date range like January 1st, 2001 through December 31st, 2018. And it can be any date range that I want it to be. I may have to set up some settings. Settings let me tell AmiBroker, am I trading long, am I trading short, both? Am I trading against daily bars, weekly bars, 5-minute bars? Am I padding, aligning my data to some symbol? All those kind of things. And then finally, depending on how your AFL is written, you may have AFL-specific parameters that you're allowed to set through the parameters window, which can be very helpful if you know you're going to be changing a parameter a lot and you don't want to keep going in and changing the actual code every time. You can set it up as a parameter, so you can just change it in this parameters window, and that way you don't risk accidentally changing something you didn't mean to inside your AFL. We will look at an example of all that in a couple minutes. I just wanted to have them all the steps there on a slide so that you have them for reference later. All right, so once we've set up that environment for our analysis, for our test, we're ready to execute one of those 4 types that we keep talking about: a scan, an explore, a backtest, or an optimize. We're not going to look at optimize today, but an optimize is simply a series, an automated series of backtests. But we are going to look at the first 3. So we're going to go back to AmiBroker, and we're going to go to my analysis window. And I can get a new analysis window by clicking on the little plus here. And AmiBroker would ask me what I want to put in my new window. Do I want to put in a new chart? Do I want to put in a new analysis window, a new batch file, whatever? I'm going to use the analysis window that I already have open. And we can see that I've opened a file called cci.afl, which is a little AFL file that Dave wrote for us. And we'll take a look at the actual AFL in there a little bit later so we can see the code. But for now, the first thing that was mentioned in the list that we went through just a second ago was we need to pick what set of symbols we're applying this AFL to. And in this case, we're going to start out by just saying apply to current, which means the current symbol, which is whatever symbol we see up here. So just to change it to something else, let's assume we want to run against Microsoft. I need to pick a date range. So maybe I just want 3 years of, or 4 years of test data. So from the beginning of 2015 to the end of 2018, that's my date range. I could also pick one recent bar or one recent day, which mean the same thing when I'm running against a daily database. They mean slightly different things, obviously, if I'm running against an intraday database. Or I could run against all the quotes for this symbol that are in my database, which I don't want to do right now because my data goes back to about 1990. So I've set up my apply to, my date range. I can go into my settings, which is this little wrench and screwdriver icon. And we can see I'm starting out with $10,000 worth of equity. I'm telling AmiBroker, yes, you can take long and short trades if you find signals. I'm running against daily bars, and I can set my commissions and other things within that file or within that settings window as well. We won't go through all the settings right now, but there's a lot of other good stuff in here as well. So I can say OK there. And then finally, this little icon that nobody knows what to call it. Some people say it looks like a little black and white abacus. Some people think it looks like an equalizer on a stereo. Whatever you want to call that little black and white icon, that will call it my parameters window. So the parameters window will let me change things that Dave set up in his AFL to be specified via parameters. So the maximum number of positions. He's overriding the starting equity, so it would now be 100,000. My length for the CCI indicator, the threshold for buy signals, and what the target value is. So those are all things that are in the parameters window. So I've set all those things. Now I'm ready to run an analysis. So the simplest analysis is a scan. And right now we're just running against Apple. So when I hit the scan button, AmiBroker is just going to tell me where all the buy and sell signals are. So we can see a buy signal on January 28th, another one on the 29th, another one on the 30th, yada, yada, yada. We see a sell signal on April 24th, another sell signal on April 27th. So you'll notice that these aren't necessarily all signals that would be traded, right? Because if we were trading this system, we would probably enter on the 28th, and on the 29th, we would just ignore that buy signal because we're already in a position. But when we do a scan, AmiBroker is going to tell us where every buy and every sell signal that it defines is. If we go down to the bottom, we see the last thing on our list is December 26th of 2018, there was a buy signal. If we had changed this to filter and we click the little green filter icon and pick a watch list, and just to keep it somewhat brief, we'll look at the current S&P 100 and we do our scan. Now we get a whole bunch of things in our list. We get Apple, scroll down, we get ABBV, ABT, etc. And I can ask AmiBroker to, for example, sort those by date. So I can see that starting on January 6th, 2015, I had a buy signal for Caterpillar, a sell signal for SPG. On the 7th, I had some buys and sells, etc. Right, but I'm still, all I get is what AmiBroker wants to tell me, which are entry and exit signals, buy and sell in this case, because we have no short recover signals defined in this AFL, the date that the signal occurred, and AmiBroker throws in the closing price just for good measure. All right, so what if I wanted to find something more than what AmiBroker wants to tell me with its built-in scan? I can use an Explorer. With an Explorer, AmiBroker will give me 2 columns by default. It'll give me a ticker column and a date time column, which in the case of an end-of-day database is just a date column. And then the rest of the columns are things that I chose to define. So in this case, close, price, the CCI value from the previous day, and what the threshold is, which is the same for every bar. And I could add as many more or less as many more columns as I wanted to. There is a limit on how many things you can output in an exploration, but it's somewhere well over 100 columns. So for the most part, you can consider that open season on all the things that you might want to spit out for every bar. In this particular case, we'll look at the AFL in a few minutes, but I've chosen to only spit out data, only create a new row when there's a buy signal with this symbol. We've got a lot of background noise going on. Is that you, Morley?
No, I was muted. I'll just mute everybody else.
Okay, thanks. All right, so in summary, the exploration lets us decide when to output a new row of data. In this case, it's whenever there's a buy signal, and it lets us choose or specify what columns of data we want. So we could have as many columns here as we wanted to. All right, and then finally, we're going to look at a back test. And the back test, as I said earlier, actually goes out and uses all the rules that we've given to AmiBroker in terms of position sizing and number of open positions and where the buy and sell signals are. And AmiBroker basically trades that system against the watch list that we've specified. So in this case, our watch list was the S&P 100. And it's actually the current S&P 100. So we've introduced some survivorship and pre-selection bias by going back to 2015 with the current S&P 100, but that's a conversation for another day. But we can see AmiBroker has told us, okay, on January 6th, you entered a trade in Caterpillar at a price of $75.51, and that trade didn't exit until April 10th, and it exited at a price of $72.72. So there was a net change of 3.7%, and that's what our profit was minus 3.7%. And there are more columns in our trade list telling us what the cumulative profit to this point was, how many bars we held on to the trade, how big our position was, things like that. Right, and so on and so forth. We see that on January 7th, I don't think I can select them all. Okay, on January 7th, we entered about 10 more trades, right? And we can see all their exit dates. January 8th, we entered a few more, and so on and so on. At some point, based on the maximum number of positions, which in our parameters window was 20, when we get up to 20 open positions, AmiBroker is going to stop taking trades until some of them start to exit and free up positions. So basically what we have here is what would the results have been if we had traded this set of rules against the current S&P 100 for the last 4 years. Right, and down here at the bottom, we can see what a quick summary of our overall results. We have a compound annual return of about 10.5%, a max system drawdown of about 17%, CAR over MDD of 0.61, and almost 70% winners, 324 winners and 142 losers. Down at the very bottom of the trade list, we see a number of positions that say open. So most of these trades say long. Those are trades that have completed. Any of these at the bottom that say open long are trades that opened, and as of the end of 2018, we're still in progress. So that's the open long versus long. If Dave was using, say, stops or profit targets, time stops, any of that, you would see a designation here in the trade column where it might say something like long, and then in parentheses it would say max loss if we hit a fixed stop loss. Or it might say long, and then in parentheses trail for trailing stop loss. So AmiBroker tries to give you as much information as it can in terms of what happened with this trade. When it entered, when it exited, why it exited, what the prices were, profit and loss, etc. In addition, after we've run a back test, this little icon that looks like a spreadsheet, if we click on that, AmiBroker will give us even more information about our back test. So in addition to those little summary things that we saw at the bottom of the screen, like compound annual return, we can see all sorts of other stuff, like total dollars of net profit, exposure, which is a number indicating how much of your capital was in use each night on an average basis over the course of the back test. Risk-adjusted return, which takes exposure and CAR both into effect, how many trades, what the average P&L was, what those numbers were for the winners, the losers, and then a bunch of other metrics down here at the bottom. And if we wish, if this isn't enough metrics for you, you can create your own metrics and add those to this report as well. So if you want to see, for example, AmiBroker has a very strange way of calculating Sharpe ratio on a per trade basis. If you want to calculate Sharpe ratio on a portfolio basis, the way the entire rest of the world does, you can calculate your own Sharpe ratio. In addition to those statistics in tabular form, AmiBroker has a number of charts. Some of the ones that you see here are not built-in AmiBroker ones because I've built my own. But some of the ones that are standard is AmiBroker gives you an equity curve, which most every backtesting platform will give you that. So here's our equity curve for Dave's CCI strategy. Here's a slight variation that's the same thing, but it's got buy and hold equity on it as well. So we can see that Dave's strategy was performing better than buy and hold. Another standard AmiBroker chart is this one that says underwater equity, which is your drawdown chart. So we can see wherever the blue waves are deepest, that's our biggest drawdown. So we can see this deepest one here is our minus 12.5% drawdown. Let's see, monthly performance is an AmiBroker chart, so number 4. So that shows you on a month-by-month basis what your percent P&L was based on the equity curve. The rest of these, I think, are all, or mostly, yep, the rest of them are all custom ones that I put together, other than these two at the end, which is AmiBroker gives you a profit distribution chart. So if you're wondering what percentage of my trades made, let's say, 0 to 5%, 166 of my trades made 0 to 5%. I'm sorry, that's right, 0 to 5. 5 to 10, we had 120 trades. 10 to 15, we had 25 trades, etc. And the same on the negative side. Right, and then similar charts for max adverse excursion and max favorable excursion. So lots of data that you can pull out of AmiBroker once you've completed a backtest. All right, so back to our presentation and moving right along. Watch lists. So we talked a little bit about using a watch list, and the watch list that I used was the S&P 100 watch list, which is a watch list that Norgate defines, and it's there in my list for me to use whenever I want to. But sometimes I may want my own watch list. So one reason that I might want a watch list is maybe I want my analysis to be limited to some set of securities, which I can't just identify with rules inside my AFL. So for example, if I trade futures, I might want to run a backtest only against commodity ETFs. Or if I'm a stocks guy, I might want to run a backtest against stocks that have weekly options. So I could create that watch list in any of a number of different ways and import it into AmiBroker. Another reason I might want to use a watch list is if I'm running a lengthy exploration that's going to run many, many times, I might want to start out with a watch list that really only has the stocks that are ever going to qualify. So for example, if I look at the Russell, let's say I'm testing against the Russell 3000, the Russell 3000 current and past list has almost 11,000 symbols in that list. So if I was testing against the Russell 3000 universe, I have 11,000 symbols in my watch list. One thing I can do to speed things up is if one of my entry rules says that a stock has to have more than 1 million shares of volume before I'm willing to consider it for a trade entry, then I can look through the entire Russell 3000 historical watch list and say, you know what, only save the ones that have ever had 1 million shares of volume on any given day, because the Russell 3000 contains a lot of pretty small stocks and thinly traded stocks. So by running that pre-screen, maybe I can go from 10,000 symbols down to, let's say, maybe 6,000 symbols. And now my optimization will run a lot faster because I only have 60% as much data to run against. And obviously, the other reason to use watch lists is if you're trying to compare different systems or different variations of the same system, you want to be running against the same watch list every time so that you're comparing apples to apples. We already talked about how to specify a watch list using the apply to filter. In that filter, you can use a watch list both to include symbols and also to exclude symbols. So for example, if I really want most of the S&P 500, but I don't want biotech stocks, for example, I could define a list of biotech stocks and I could put those on my exclude list. So there's a number of ways to create a watch list. One is to select symbols one at a time and right-click them and say add to an existing watch list. If you're only doing a few, that's probably the quickest way. If you're doing very many, obviously it's going to take you a while. A second way is that AmiBroker will let you type in a list of symbols. So you can right-click on a watch list and say add list, and AmiBroker will give you a little dialog box with a text edit field in it, and you can just start typing AAPL, comma, MSFT, comma, FB, comma, etc. Again, if you already know the symbols that you want, and there's not very many of them, that can be a pretty quick way to go. A third way is after you've done some sort of an analysis, let's say you've done an exploration to find all those symbols that have, at some point in their history, they've had volume greater than 1 million shares. We can right-click on that set of results from our exploration, and we can add the entire set back to a watch list. And there's a number of options. You can add them to a watch list, you can replace the watch list contents with the results, etc. And then finally, you can simply import a CSV file. And I say CSV, but it's really a file with one symbol name per line, per row, and there's an AmiBroker symbol watch list import menu item that you can use, and you can just import that entire thing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about AFL. I know we're getting a little bit short on time here. We've been going for an hour or so, but just to give you a brief introduction into what AFL looks like. So AFL is AmiBroker Formula Language. It's a scripting language based on C and C++. And it's what we use to create AmiBroker scripts. And by scripts, I mean anything that we want to use for generating custom plotting, custom charts, as well as all the 4 types of analysis we've talked about. If you can't do something within AFL itself, you can also extend AFL with the DLL written in some other language. But honestly, there shouldn't be very many reasons for you to have to do that. I've been writing AmiBroker code for about 10 years, and I'm actually right in the middle of creating my first DLL right now. And it's really more a matter of needing to have an entity that keeps a web connection alive rather than that I can't do things within AFL. In that help file that we looked at earlier, there is a section titled Understanding How AFL Works. If you go to that section and start to read it, one of the very first things you'll run into is a description of arrays. So definitely take a look at that. Arrays are a really important concept to master if you want to be proficient in AFL. And they're also something that people struggle with a lot, because if you've programmed in any other language, you're kind of accustomed to thinking of arrays as something that you have to iterate through. So if I want to add 7 to every price in my price array, I can start with array element 0 and I can add 7, and I can then iterate to array element 1 and add 7, and array element 2 and add 7. And in AmiBroker, I don't have to do that. I can just say price array plus 7, and AmiBroker will do the iterating and add 7 to every value in that array. And I can do that for all sorts of operations. I can combine prices, I can apply indicators, I can look for recent events. There are lots and lots of things that you can do with array operations in AmiBroker, and it will be orders of magnitude faster than if you try to loop through yourself. So definitely master that if you are going to try to learn AFL. All right, so just to take a quick look at a little bit of sample AFL, we don't even need to go back to AmiBroker right now. So here's a little bit of AFL for plotting historical volatility. AmiBroker has lots of indicators, as I mentioned earlier, but historical volatility isn't one of them. So I wrote my own chart indicator called historical volatility. And all it does is it has a param statement there in the first line. And the thing that's in quotes where it says periods, that's what's going to appear in that parameter window that we looked at before. So there's going to be a parameter called periods, and the default value, which is the first numeric, is going to be 100. And that value can range between 2 and 500 in increments of 1. Whatever the user selects for that parameter value is going to be assigned back to the number of periods variable, num periods. And we have a formula for, formula for calculating the historical volatility. We won't go through the details of that, but basically historical volatility is simply an annualized standard deviation. And then finally, we have a plot statement. And the plot statement tells AmiBroker, hey, I've got this thing that I calculated. It's in a variable called HV. Please go out and put it on a chart. Here's a label for it. Here's the color I want, and here's the line style that I want. And there are other things that you can specify in a plot, as well as different forms of plots. So you can do histograms and open, high, low, close bars and ribbons and all sorts of things. But this is just a very basic plot a line on a chart, right? So basically 3 lines of AFL. Not too bad. All right, let's take a look at Dave's AFL. So this is the AFL for Dave's backtest. So again, at the top, you'll see that Dave's got a couple of param statements where he allows the user to specify some input. Then he's got a couple set option commands which override things that are in the AmiBroker analysis settings window. So he's going to override the initial equity and the maximum number of open positions. And then he's going to set his position size. And AmiBroker allows several different position sizing mechanisms. One of them is percent of equity, which is what the SPS percent of equity parameter there is. I can also tell AmiBroker every trade is the same value. For example, I want every trade to be $1,000, $1,000, $1,000. Or I want every trade to be the same number of shares. I want to buy 100 shares no matter what. I don't care if it's a $2 stock or a $200 stock, always buy 100 shares. So that tells AmiBroker how to do the position sizing. The round lot size tells AmiBroker how to round the number of shares it's buying. So we're saying round to 1. The reason Dave's got the comment about no fractional shares there is that you could set that to 0. If you're the kind of person that buys and sells mutual funds, for example, you can buy partial shares. So AmiBroker will let you specify partial shares. And then a few more parameter statements for the things that Dave's going to use in his backtest. The length of his CCI indicator, what the threshold is for entry, and we've got that broken into two parts, one for a param and one for an optimize. And since we're a little short on time, I won't go into the details of why that is right at the moment. The next two lines, 17 and 18, Dave is first calculating the CCI indicator based on the parameter, the length parameter that the user specified. And then he's looking back one place because when he generates a buy signal, he wants to compare yesterday's CCI value to the threshold to see if he should enter today. Then we've got a couple more, another, param and optimize combination there for our target. And that's what will tell us when we should sell. So we're entering when the CCI value goes below some threshold, which by default is 100 minus 150. And we're going to sell it when the CCI goes above some target, which by default is going to be 180, positive 180. Then we specify the buy and sell price. So the buy price is going to be at the close, the sell price is going to be at the close. And then finally, the very last line there, short equals cover equals 0, just says assign both of those values 0 so that if in the settings I've chosen to do both long and short testing, AmiBroker knows there aren't really any short signals. So if we boil this down to sort of the core lines that Dave needed to run a backtest, it's really just from line 12 to line 26, well, line 29, that are really crucial, which specifies the indicator and the buy and the sell rules and the buy and the sell prices. So again, you can, this goes back to what I started talking about at the very beginning, which is you can get started with a backtest with a pretty sparse set of AFL functions. Now, obviously, there's a lot more things that you can do, and I've written backtests that are a couple thousand lines long. In fact, I've got one right now that's 4,500 lines long. But there's a lot that you can do with knowing very little coding and using very few commands. So that was our whirlwind tour of AmiBroker and backtesting. I've got contact information for Dave and I on the final slide, and I will send a copy of the slides to Morley so that he can distribute them to any of you that